My quiet suburban life blew up the second I pulled into my street and saw 4 enormous military cargo containers blocking my driveway. I stood there, suitcase in hand, fresh off a grueling 2-day business trip, wondering if jet lag had finally scrambled my brain. But not HOA's massive green boxes were real. For steel walls stacked in a perfect barricade between me and my garage. A bright yellow paper fluttered on my mailbox. I tore it down and scanned it with shaking hands. Notice of violation. Property owner has 30 days to resolve all infractions or face additional penalties. Containers will remain in place until all fines are paid in full. My blood boiled as a familiar figure strutted across the street. Clipboard in hand, smug grin plastered across her face. Julia Carrington, the reigning queen of the Oak Hills Estates HOA, was practically glowing with satisfaction. "Mr. Parker, welcome home," she called, gesturing proudly toward the containers as though unveiling a masterpiece. "I see you've noticed our enforcement action." "Julia, are you kidding me? You can't just block someone's driveway." "Actually, we can. Section 17.9 of the community bylaw signed by all residents gives us authority to take reasonable steps to enforce compliance." She flipped casually through her clipboard. "You have 6 violations." Her right hand, Tiffany Brooks, stepped from behind one of the containers with a smile far too chipper for the situation. "Your garden gnomes are 2 inches over the height limit, the bird feeder violates our wildlife ordinance, and your mailbox?" "Wrong shade of black." I blinked. "That mailbox has been there for 7 years. We updated the approved color palette while you were away," Julia said sweetly. "Residents were notified by email." I pulled out my phone and scrolled. Spotty service on the road meant I'd missed half my inbox. "This is absurd." "Rules are rules, Mr. Parker," Julia said, faux sympathy thick in her voice. "Your total fines come to $24,800. For garden gnomes and a bird feeder? Daily compounding penalties," Tiffany explained with a grin. "Plus an administrative fee for container placement." Before I could respond, my neighbor, Greg Sanders, jogged over, eyebrows climbing as he spotted the containers. "Wes, what the hell? Are those real military containers?" Julia shot him a warning glare. "This doesn't concern you, Mr. Sanders. They're blocking the sidewalk. That can't be legal." "They're on HOA common property," she snapped, turning on her heel. "Come along, Tiffany. We have other violations to address." Once they were gone, Greg leaned in and whispered, "They've gone full dictatorship. While you were gone, they fined Mrs. Crenshaw $500 because her granddaughter didn't have a visitor's pass." I stared at the metal blockade. "Where do you even get containers like this?" "Julia's brother works in government surplus. These things started popping up whenever someone pissed her off." He glanced around. "I caught them measuring my lawn with a ruler yesterday." My phone buzzed, a reminder. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., I was due at the governor's office. After years as a special investigator for the state, I'd just been appointed to lead a new task force on housing reform. And my own HOA had just declared war on me. "I need to get these things moved tonight," I muttered. "Good luck." The Lewises had one in their driveway for 3 weeks. Christmas lights stayed up 2 days too long. I circled one of the containers, snapping photos. My eyes caught something beneath a sloppy layer of paint. A military serial number. Interesting. "Greg, can you give me a ride to a hotel?" "Yeah. What are you thinking?" "I need to make some calls." I didn't sleep much that night, not just because of the stiff hotel bed, but because the pieces were falling into place. For the past 6 months, I'd been investigating HOA abuses across the state: selective enforcement, financial mismanagement, excessive fines. Oak Hills Estates had popped up more than once. I'd planned to settle in quietly and announce my new position later. But Julia forced my hand. At 6 a.m., my phone rang. "Governor Parker? This is General McAllister from Fort Braden. We found those missing cargo containers." "You were right. They were never properly decommissioned. Someone's in serious trouble." "Thank you, General," I said, already grabbing my jacket. "I'd like to be there when you recover them." 3 hours later, military police rolled up in front of my house. Julia and Tiffany came running, pale and panicked. "What's going on?" Julia demanded as soldiers inspected the containers. A colonel stepped forward. "Ma'am, these containers are property of the U.S. military. They were reported missing 3 months ago. How did they get here? My brother said they were surplus, she stammered. His name, ma'am? I stepped forward. Colonel, I'm Wes Parker. These containers are blocking my property. He nodded. We'll have them removed immediately. Julia's eyes narrowed. Parker? As in? I'm the governor. Gasps rippled through the watching neighbors. I'd also like to know why my HOA is using stolen military equipment to punish homeowners. Tiffany went pale. Julia tried to recover. It's all a misunderstanding. We followed proper enforcement procedures. We'll talk about procedures at tonight's HOA meeting, I said calmly. I'll be there. As the containers were loaded up and hauled away, Greg came up beside me, barely containing a grin. Governor Parker, huh? Julia looks like she's about to faint. She's not done yet, I muttered. She's already planning a counterattack. At that evening's meeting, the community center buzzed with murmurs. I slipped into the back row. No one noticed me at first. All eyes were on Julia, white-knuckling the podium. Before we begin, she said, voice shaking only slightly, I'd like to address the Reynolds property incident. There was a clerical error. Stealing military property isn't a clerical error, Mrs. Crenshaw snapped from the front row. It's a crime. No one stole anything, Julia barked. Now moving on. What about the fines? Greg interrupted. Is Wes still expected to pay nearly $25,000 for garden gnomes? The room erupted. Julia banged her gavel. Order. The board will review the matter in private session. Why private? Someone called out. It's standard procedure. The meeting spiraled as Julia rattled off new violations, wind chimes, work vans, flower beds. Faces in the crowd turned from annoyed to furious. Finally, I stepped to the mic. My name is Wes Parker. Silence fell. I have a few questions about governance and financial transparency. Julia forced a smile. Of course. We welcome all resident input. When was the last independent audit of HOA finances? Tiffany jumped in. We review internally every quarter. I asked about an independent audit. Awkward silence. We haven't found that necessary, Julia said tightly. My second question, who authorized use of military containers? It was an error that's been corrected. An error that happened 4 times? Residents began shouting their own stories. Containers for basketball hoops, decorations, bird baths. My final question, I said. Are you aware I've been leading a state investigation into HOA abuses for the past 6 months? Oak Hills has the highest complaint rate in the entire state. The room went silent. I pulled out my ID and a thick folder. We've collected over 50 statements from residents detailing harassment, selective enforcement, and financial misconduct. This is intimidation, Julia hissed. You're using your office for revenge. Actually, I said, laying the folder on the table, I was interested in HOA reform before I ever moved here. But your actions have made a perfect case study. Greg stepped forward. I've got security footage of them spray painting violations on my lawn at 5 a.m. More residents stood up with their stories. Mrs. Crenshaw described repainting her front door 4 times. The Rodriguez family had been fined because their son's wheelchair ramp didn't match aesthetic standards. Julia snatched her bag. Meeting adjourned. Actually, I said, nodding to the woman entering behind me, state law requires HOA meetings discussing financial matters to remain open. This is Special Investigator Lee from the Attorney General's office. She has some questions. State troopers moved in. Tiffany tried to bolt but was stopped at the door. We have a warrant to examine HOA financial records, Investigator Lee said, and to search board members' homes for evidence. This is outrageous, Julia shouted. You can't do this. We can. The judge is especially interested in the connection between missing military equipment and HOA enforcement. Julia and Tiffany were led out in handcuffs. Residents cheered. Greg clapped me on the back. You knew this would happen, didn't you? I nodded. Sometimes you have to let people show who they really are. But that night, they showed just how dangerous they could be. At 3:17 a.m., I woke to the sound of shattering glass and fire. Flames danced up my living room curtains, thick smoke choking the air. I stumbled out, calling 911, ducked through the back door as another explosion rocked the house. Neighbors gathered in pajamas as fire trucks arrived. A car sped off, lights off. Did you see that? I asked Greg. No, but I saw Julia and Tiffany across the street. Then they disappeared. Detectives arrived. Governor, we believe this was arson. The fire chief confirmed it, 3 Molotov cocktails. Multiple points of origin. You're lucky to be alive. By morning, my house was ashes. But my story was everywhere. Governor targeted an HOA arson attack. The Rodriguez family appeared on the news showing the ramp they'd been fined over. Mrs. Crenshaw shared how she'd been forced to repaint her door again and again. By 4 p.m., investigator Lee called me. We found them. Julia and Tiffany. At her sister's cabin. They had gas cans, bottles, and a hit list. The Rodriguez family was next. She paused. Meredith's already talking. She says Julia convinced her you were out to ruin them. That evening, my front yard was packed. Neighbors holding casseroles, tools, and open hearts. We'll help rebuild, said one. My husband's a contractor. My son's a lawyer. He wants to help with reform laws. Greg grinned. Told you once they're not afraid, they stand up. At a new HOA meeting, we stood together, not as victims but as a community. When asked if I'd leave after all this, I answered simply, absolutely not. 6 months later, I returned to a brand new home. The whole neighborhood came out. Greg handed me a gift. A garden gnome, exactly 2 inches too tall. For your yard, he said, grinning. I placed it beside the bird feeder. The community center now had a new sign. Oak Hills Estates HOA serving, not ruling. My phone buzzed. Fletcher pled guilty. More indictments coming. Reform bill passes tomorrow. I smiled. Sometimes change begins with a garden gnome.